I think I'm a special one.
Fabregas, lovely ball threaded through. Costa, what a start!
Frank Lampard to win it. He's got it.
He's done it! The greatest night in the history of Chelsea Football Club.
Hello there guys, Daniel Childs back here again. Hope you're doing really well. This is, as promised, the interview with the brilliant Liam Twomey, Chelsea correspondent, writer, reporter for The Athletic. It was a great conversation. We spoke about a lot of topics. Are Chelsea back? The potential title race, Champions League, squad depth, goalkeeper, the January transfer window, all the big issues. And I think Liam gave a lot of great insight into what's been going on at Chelsea, into what's been going on with Enzo Maresca. If you want to see more conversations like this, because I love doing them and I know you guys like listening to them, please hit that like button. Helps get the show out to more people. Share the video around or podcast around with friends and family to get more people involved in the Son of Chelsea community. If you are listening on the podcast, please do give us a positive rate and review. Also helps get the show out to more people. But no more wasting time. Let's get to the conversation with Liam Twomey right now. Okay, so Liam, the first thing to ask, are Chelsea back?
In what sense? I mean, the Chelsea that most of the fans who were singing that song at St Mary's would recognise, I don't think is ever coming back. The Chelsea of the Abramovich era, the one that is now viewed probably to some degree with rose-tinted spectacles by a lot of fans, is gone. Like the club is being operated a completely different way. The team looks completely different, plays completely differently. But if you're talking about a return to more recognisable Chelsea standards, then yeah, maybe we're seeing that. Maybe we are. But still feel it's slightly premature, especially maybe singing it a few days before going to play Tottenham away from home could be tempting fate a little bit. But they're certainly trending in the right direction, and they're pretty nice to watch as well.
Yeah, I saw an insane stat post Southampton that I think it's the highest highest goals per game Chelsea have ever had during a season, which I was just contemplating this, that like a couple of years ago, the idea Chelsea would have this level of productivity in the final third and have multiple players who could be hitting double figures before the end of the season. I mean, it's just, in the days of Werner and Havertz, it's like you could have, asking for one of them to hit that number felt kind of unrealistic. Nowadays, we've got tons of attacking prowess and strength. And I think just as a fan, just like taking a longer term view, I think that's something you kind of have to appreciate, that progress and development, which, to be fair, absolutely started last season under Pochettino, but has, I think, gone up another level with Maresca.
Yeah, I think you're seeing that Cole Palmer, Nicholas Jackson, Noni Madueke, they've made individual strides in terms of development, but they've also made collective strides in terms of their chemistry and understanding each other. And that only happens with time. So they are absolutely all benefiting from the year they had under Maresca. So they are absolutely all benefiting from the year they had under Pochettino. But having said all that, I think you have to give Maresca a big share of that credit too, because the system, the infrastructure that he set up, which was the thing that was most glaringly missing in the worst moments under Pochettino, where it all felt very off the cuff, I think has put a lot of these guys in their best positions to succeed. I don't think many people would have predicted going into the year that one of Maresca's first moves would have been to shift Cole Palmer permanently from the right wing, which is, okay, not where he spent most of his time under Pochettino, but it was where he started in the formation, to just, you're an attacking midfielder full time now in the right half space. And that's where you're going to do all your damage. And I think it's been the right move, not just for Palmer, but also for the attack, because it means that you can get Madueke into the team, or you can get Pedro Neto in the team. You get another winger in on the other side. There are more players for Palmer to hit with his exceptional passing and vision. And there are more opportunities for him to receive the ball, or rather his game is now more focused, even more focused than it was before, on receiving the ball in that half space in between the lines on the half turn, which is where he can be most valuable, where he can stress opposing defences most. And he's always got things to aim for. So I think that's the structural element of why Chelsea's attack is doing well. But when you're talking about maybe not him, but certainly because he was exceptional last year, but certainly Jackson and Madueke making steps up, I think that also comes down to what they went through last season and the natural kind of development curve that young players follow.
It certainly is a case of a lot of credit going to Maresca. I remember we had a conversation on the walk to the Inter Milan game, the last preseason. I think it was the last preseason friendly, and obviously my mood, and I think a lot of people's mood, was very different. There was a lot of trepidation, there was a lot of fear about the season, and even on that day, there were things about that performance that kind of worried me in terms of how Stamford Bridge was going to take in Maresca's football, and pretty much since maybe the Palace game, because you talk about system there, and I'm not denying there's no structure to the way Chelsea play, like there clearly is, but I don't know, I feel like Maresca has not been as advertised in the summer, but I don't think that's necessarily a negative. And I've been having conversations with people, and I've been trying to wrap my brain around this, whether it's a case of him moving from a certain level of championship player to a higher caliber of player, and because of being able to work with a higher caliber of player, he feels more free. Or I don't know, is it himself kind of changing to the club he's within, understanding that at Chelsea this kind of slow passing football just hasn't worked, and maybe culturally he understands that. I mean, I know a lot of this is maybe just theory from me, but I don't know if it's something you've noticed, because I know you wrote about this, I think it was during the international break, about when we're going to see Maresca ball, but I don't know, based on what I was told it was, we haven't seen it, and I don't think that's a negative.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen the very ideologically extreme version that Leicester played for most of last season, which was not hugely popular with Leicester fans. I mean, you could see the reaction that Maresca got when he went back to Leicester was not even hostility; it was kind of indifference. Like they don't look upon what he's doing at Chelsea and think wistfully, we wish he was still here. And that's not because his football wasn't very successful. It was in the Championship. It's because they were seeing something very different week to week to what Chelsea fans are seeing right now. And it's not completely unrecognisable. Look, the structure, I think, is the thing that hasn't changed from Leicester to Chelsea. Maresca's very clear. He wants basically a 3-2-4-1 or a 3-box-3, however you want to call it, with this box midfield, three defenders in possession, and 3 proper attackers, with the 2 attacking midfielders very attacking in terms of looking to get into the box, playing in the half spaces. But how he's arrived at that structure, I think, has been a lot more flexible than people anticipated. Last year, he was just largely putting Ricardo Pereira there every week. And this year, it's been Marco Correa at times, it's been Malo Gusto at times. Sometimes they've been going into the base of midfield, sometimes they've been going into attacking midfield. Sometimes, for the first time this season, he put Moises Caicedo at right back. And I don't know if you can call it inverting, if he's a central midfielder in the first place and he's been asked to move into his natural role, but that's what he did. And I think it shows a level of tactical dexterity from Maresca, even if he has this end structure in mind. The flexibility of how he gets there from game to game based on who Chelsea are playing and how he feels they can best set up has been quite interesting to watch, and I think quite impressive to watch. And the other thing is that the main difference from Leicester is that he hasn't been as dogmatic in terms of we need 70% possession, or as 60-70% possession, this Guardiola level of control of the ball in a game. Chelsea have been far more prepared to sit off teams at not necessarily for the entirety of a game, but for stretches of games. And certainly when they're in front, they'll sit off and counter-attack. He knows he's got players that thrive attacking more quickly, with Palmer's passing, with the speed of Madueke, Neto, Jackson's relentless running in behind, which is something I've written about this week, which will be on The Athletic. So I think there's been a certain amount of recognition of his personnel as well, which I always find that impressive in a coach, where you cater your style to the strengths of the players you've got. You know, you can't just walk in and blanket say, this is how we're going to play. You know, the way AVB came in at Chelsea, it's like, you know, we're going to play a high line. I don't care that we've got a 32-year-old John Terry that can't really do it anymore. Like, with that amount of space behind him, we're going to play this certain style of football that doesn't really suit Didier Drogba or you know, or Frank Lampard or some of the other players in the team. And I'm just not going to worry about any of that. They're going to have to adapt to me, and then throw your arms up when it doesn't work, you know, or when there are problems in the dressing room because of that. And I think Maresca's been very smart in terms of his management of the squad, but also in his management of games and the way he set up teams. That doesn't mean that Chelsea have got everything perfect this season. They are giving up, I think, too many chances still, and it was a bit worrying how much Southampton created even with 10 men in that game. But they win the game 5-1, and he has turned them into a real attacking juggernaut. I think it's fair to say that. And part of that is because of the structural advantages that they create throughout games.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I think that Southampton game, I do ponder defensively whether it was also just the personnel, especially in the two centre-backs who I was stunned started a Premier League game together, and you know, I don't think have entirely convinced even in the Conference League games, which have been pretty dominant. And that's, you know, something that we'll get back to, because I want to slightly talk about, I know you wrote a piece about, you know, title challenges, and there's been a lot of discussion recently about are Chelsea in the title race, Maresca playing that down. Obviously, from a media point of view, when you've seen Maresca up close, whether it's on the touchline or in press conferences, that's obviously a big part of being Chelsea head coach, being one of these top coaches at one of the big clubs. You have to handle the media well. It's been interesting seeing Graham Potter do his media tour quite recently, and I like Potter. I think he's a nice guy. I think he has a lot of great football ideas, but clearly that was something he struggled with, the intensity and scrutiny. How have you found Maresca, I guess, compared to other coaches at Chelsea you've dealt with, because you've dealt with a lot, and kind of dealing with this awkward time, I think, in Chelsea history, when you've got fans who do feel disconnected, but being able to bring them along on this journey, which so far has been mostly positive, you have to say?
Yeah, I've been really impressed with that side of Maresca, I have to say. He's one of the more impressive coaches that I've dealt with in terms of the way he's projected himself publicly. He came into a tricky situation. You know, as a coach with his resume, you don't get the Chelsea job if everything at Chelsea is going well, because you wouldn't be first choice if everything was going well. It is a build. I know they finished 6th last year, but there were a lot of issues on and off the pitch to address. He came into an ownership situation that was dysfunctional. There is still tension at ownership level that has not been resolved, and I think he's handled that extremely well whenever he's been required to talk about it publicly. Came into a squad which I think had a bit more of a settled hierarchy after the Pochettino season than before, when it was just a complete blank slate, really. But there was still a lot that needed to be sorted out and structured, and he's done that. And then you add the aggressive approach that the club took with some very high-profile outgoings, this whole bomb squad thing that played out in the last 2-3 weeks of the window in particular. He handled that, I think, in the smartest way that he could as a coach, which is that he owned every decision on a football level, regardless of whether it was a club decision or not. You know, I mean, there are clear reasons on a contractual level why Chelsea would not want Raheem Sterling, why they wouldn't want Ben Chilwell, why they wouldn't want some of the other players that were made available towards the end of the summer. But but Maresca, whenever he spoke about it publicly, would say, I like Ben Chilwell. I just prefer different types of fullbacks for my system. I like Raheem Sterling. I just prefer different types of wingers for my system. He always made it a football. He always framed the conversation in football terms publicly, and he owned it, which I think is what the ownership want to see. I think fans want to see a coach that projects authority in these situations when decisions need to be made. You need to look like you're in control and on top of everything, and he always has. I think it's been very interesting the way that he's managed personalities in the squad. I mean, only yesterday we had Noni Madueke getting challenged publicly after he'd had a good game against Southampton. Maresca using the stick rather than the carrot. He needs to be better. He needs to train harder. And this is something Pochettino said about Madueke last year as well. So it's two different coaches have reached a similar conclusion about the way Madueke needs to be best managed. But that's an interesting thing for Maresca to do when things are going well. The things that he said about Reece James, questioning his leadership, which surprised me. I still don't really know what the end game of that is, but it shows a willingness from Maresca to say things that create headlines in order to get his point across. He's not going to be some wallflower in press conferences that just wants to straight bat everything and get away. If he's got a point he wants to make, he's prepared to make it and deal with the consequences of that and be in control of these relationships with his players and really set the terms of engagement, with the dressing room. And I think we've heard similar things behind the scenes, that he's just been very direct and honest with players, one-to-one, and that's largely been respected within the dressing room. There are obviously players who want to be playing more. That's the same at every club. There are players who are annoyed at only being in the Conference League team, largely. I mean, Christopher Nkunku's disgruntlement has been well documented in the last couple of weeks. He's just won. But it's about how you manage those situations as a coach. That's how you have staying power at a big club, in addition to winning games. It's how you manage these dynamics. And I think in everything he's done publicly so far, and we didn't even mention the Enzo Fernandez thing in the summer, the live
it's easy to forget how much stuff happened during the summer. I kept on forgetting, there was this bit, there was that. It's easy to forget because so much happened.
Especially when you're a journalist and you have to cover every development. I forget what's happened more than a month ago. It's just mad. But yeah, the Enzo Fernandez thing was something that he couldn't have foreseen it arising in the summer, something that happened completely away from Chelsea but had profound implications for Chelsea in the Chelsea dressing room. And, you can certainly question the way that he handled that, giving Fernandez the captaincy so soon afterwards, playing it down so strongly in public. But the only thing that matters from the perspective of a football coach is the result. Like, how does this actually affect the dressing room long term? How does it affect the team's ability to win? It hasn't affected Chelsea's ability to win. And now Enzo Fernandez is playing really well. He had a bit of a slump. His position in the team wasn't quite clear. Maresca's fiddled around with that, but he's actually got Fernandez playing at a high level in addition to everyone else.
Yeah, about sort of the big personnel decisions, that has been something that's really pleasantly surprised me about Maresca. You mentioned Fernandez, like the notable moment was him being taken out of the starting lineup for Liverpool, which I didn't expect. But, I think it said a lot about a player who I felt at the time had some really poor performances. And Lavia, who barely played really during the season, to go back in at Anfield is a notable thing. And obviously then he was dropped down to the B team for a couple of weeks and it's got the right response. I think also the treatment and kind of the managing of McCullum Mudryk is another one that I think has really made Maresca distinct to his predecessors in the sense that it always felt like with Pochettino, and maybe I know Potter wasn't there that long, but it always felt like with Mudryk, maybe it was a like arm across shoulder, basically, like trying to get him to play to his best and be more supportive. And it feels maybe to me, I don't know if you agree, like he's been a little bit more forthright with Mudryk and has maybe not tolerated, I think, what other coaches have. I partly think he's got the luxury of better options now that Mudryk is not really the only left winger he has. He's got Neto and Sancho that he can go to pretty frequently. So it's not that it's Mudryk or bust, but I feel like that's another great example of like maybe it's working out because you see Mudryk's performances in especially the Conference League getting slightly better.
Yeah, I think you have to judge these things on the results, not whether you agree on a sort of emotional level with what Maresca's said about it. It's how the player actually responds that matters. And he has had a positive reaction from Mudryk, from Fernandes. I forget which game it was, but didn't Mudryk run over to him and celebrate a goal with him? It was the game in Athens against Panathinaikos, I think, when he scored at the back post. He ran over and celebrated with Maresca. And that was a bit of a surprise given some of the things that Maresca had said about Mudryk. They seemed a little on the harsh side, but he's clearly managing those relationships well behind closed doors and making it clear that he's not criticising for the sake of criticising. He's not killing these players in public just because he wants to vilify them. He's criticising because he wants improvement and he wants to help them improve. And the other thing that's very obvious is he's clearly not feeling pressure on who to pick, is he? Price tags are not determining Maresca's selection policy. He didn't hesitate to drop Enzo Fernandez when he felt that there were better options for the balance of that midfield. Hasn't hesitated to leave out Mykhailo Mudryk. He wasn't even in the squad for that Southampton game. So I think that will continue to be the way, and that's really important when you've got so many signings, so many relatively recent signings, given the scale of the overhaul of this squad over the last 2 years, to really establish a meritocracy. There will always be certain players. I mean, we know Cole Palmer's going to play whenever he's fit because he's established that, and he established it before Maresca got there.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of others that will be part of the spine of this team. I think Moises Caicedo is now in that bracket as well. He can't even be rested against Southampton. He's so important. So there are going to be exceptions, but by and large, you have to establish an atmosphere where everyone feels like they can get into the team if they play well enough. And I think he's doing a pretty good job of that so far.
Yeah, I think it's kind of helped in a sense that he has the Conference League. Because I guess that the next part of this is kind of looking ahead to the future. And I know it's kind of foolish with Chelsea, right? Like a few months ago, I made a podcast about this where Maresca was talking about the 5-year plan. And I was just like, please, let's not do the 5-year plan. I'm thinking about the next 6 months, let's get through the next 6 months first before we think about next season. But I know you wrote a piece recently about this whole, our Chelsea title challengers, what does it take to become a title challenger? And I think one of the interesting things you pointed out was the average age of Premier League champions over the past 10 years, and how it's sort of been quite a bit older than what Chelsea currently
It's basically
are.
27. That's the golden age for Premier League champions and actually also Champions League winners. It's remarkable when you look back, and I only really look back over the last 10 seasons because I feel like you go too far beyond that with certain things and you get into kind of a different era of football where it becomes harder to spot trends. But in the last 10 seasons, it has been remarkably consistent that it's kind of some years it's been closer to 26, some years closer to 28, but it's always around that level. And Chelsea's average age this year is under 24. So the initial thought of the piece that we were discussing was like, what do Chelsea need in the transfer market to become elite? And the piece kind of became, actually what they need most is probably time. Like more than signing anyone, they might just need 2 or 3 years to grow with the core of this group. And yeah, there will be, of course, transfers around that, but you're not going to need 2 years of transfers like the last 2 years of transfers, because they have a core in place that looks very promising. It will just be making additions around that. And you can try and bring the time horizon forward by signing older players. And Chelsea have signed some slightly older players, Disasi and Kunku, Sanchez. But by and large, that isn't the strategy of Clearlake Capital. That isn't what they want to do. They want to sign players under the age of 23. And when you do that, you're going to have to be a little bit more patient. Unless all of these guys are just exceptional 23-year-olds, they're probably going to have to take their losses before they can get their big wins, as most great teams do.
I mean, at the moment, you look at the Premier League table, and I mean, Chelsea are clearly ahead of schedule. And I know we haven't had the big win that people have talked about, like, you know, that could have come against Man City, that could have come against Arsenal. You know, the Liverpool game, I thought Chelsea played pretty decently against what undeniably is a very good Liverpool team. I don't think Chelsea are in a title race. I agree with Maresca. I mean, maybe the same as you, not only the age thing, but I've seen enough Chelsea seasons that go off the rails during the winter. And I think the mission is Champions League qualification. That's the main objective of this season. I mean, do you agree? To me, I think this season, there's a clear line this season for me between success and failure, and that is Champions League qualification. I know some people don't agree with me there, but I think that just based on the financial side of it, it has to be Champions League qualification, and that is the main objective this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think going into this year, there was a belief at Chelsea that there is a top 4 level of talent in this squad that they've assembled. And all of the coaches they talked to agreed with that assessment, including Maresca. And so Maresca has said publicly, no one's told me explicitly that it's Champions League or bust, that I'll be sacked if we don't get top 4. And that might be true. But even before a ball was kicked this season, I think the expectation was that Chelsea should be really pushing to be a top 4 team. And the way the early part of this season has played out, you'd have to say it would be a big disappointment now if Chelsea did not get top 4, because last year Pochettino had a bad start, but what was almost more consequential for Chelsea's season was the start that Tottenham and Aston Villa had, because they were so good in the first 10 games that it just put Chelsea in a hole that they couldn't climb out of. And they got close. I think they pass Spurs in the end, but couldn't catch Villa. And there were just too many points. I can't remember whether they passed Spurs, but anyway, they finished 6th, and they just couldn't quite make it up on Villa and Spurs in the end. Both of those teams have struggled to start this season. Villa, I think, have had a massive adaptation to Champions League football and how that's affected their Premier League form. Newcastle are struggling a bit. They haven't really been able to strengthen based on their own top 4 season a couple of years ago. Manchester United delayed the inevitable and have paid the price in terms of waiting to sack Ten Hag, and they might have already burned their chance at top 4. At the very least, they've got a big mountain to climb. So Chelsea have a great opportunity. And even when you look above them, Liverpool are very good, better than anyone expected. City have dropped several levels from their peak level. Arsenal have dropped the level somewhat unexpectedly, but they're also contending with the Champions League. So it really is just wide open. Not the title race, I don't think. I don't think that's wide open. I think Liverpool are going to win it. But top 4 is absolutely wide open. And with the points they've already banked, which I would have to stress are probably more than Chelsea expected as a club. There was an understanding going into this season that results under Maresca might not be brilliant immediately, and that they would they would probably come on stronger in the second half of the campaign than the first half. We'll see whether that plays out. But they've garnered enough points, and the struggles of their rivals have meant that they're ahead of quite a bunched up load of teams in the top three. And you'd have to say, with their schedule in the remainder of 2024, they've got a real chance to separate themselves and really consolidate now in the top three, never mind the top four, and give the teams chasing them a really, really hard task to try and catch them. So I think it would be a huge disappointment, I think, at this stage for everyone at Chelsea, including Maresca, if they didn't make top four.
Because then I think just my logic is that if Pochettino had remained, the expectation would have been, okay, you've got us to sixth, a decent end to the year. Now it has to be pushing on to the Champions League. And I think with the whole sporting directors kind of saying, judge us on 4 windows, you've had those 4 windows. It's been a decent chunk of time to see how they've built and remodeled the squad, and so much of the backroom staff changing, the academy changing in terms of leadership. Like there's been a decent chunk of time now to assess this project, whatever it is. So that's where my assessment is, and especially given the amount they've spent, I don't think it's unfair for fans to turn around and go, okay, Champions League football. The only thing I would say is that want to see Champions League football. Obviously, it's a positive, but just to sort of end this conversation, like I think that the conversation we were having earlier about how Maresca has handled the A and B team, and it's a concern of mine just looking ahead to next year, not only in terms of keeping everyone happy, but just in terms of squad level and depth in certain positions, is that when you no longer have the Conference League, which is a nice place and environment where Maresca can put his fringe players out, and it doesn't really matter because Chelsea, even if Chelsea's level drops a little bit, they're going to beat the majority of the teams. In the Champions League, especially the new Champions League format, we know that it's no longer a case where you're going to get a load of easy games. Like there's a likelihood Chelsea are going to get quite a lot of tough games, and you have to start playing more serious players in that competition if you want to do well in it. So I just wonder whether you're kind of looking at it and going, all right, it's working now, but is that maybe a slight tweak or problem that Maresca is going to have to deal with next season if we're in the Champions League that he isn't right now? Because at the moment he's been able to create a line, kind of a divide between his A and B team. I don't think he's going to be able to do that next year in the Champions League if Chelsea qualify for it.
No, he won't. He just won't. I mean, you can see the bulk of that Conference League team is not ready to play heavy Premier League minutes, never mind Champions League. You've seen that when, well, I think you saw flashes of it against Southampton. The drop-off, even though they win that game 5-1, there were an alarming number of encouraging moments for what I think is one of the worst teams we've seen in the Premier League in Southampton. So there are questions about the depth of this squad, the functional depth in this squad when you're talking about games that really matter against dangerous opponents in the Premier League and Champions League. There will be a lot less wiggle room next year, and that will be a strain on. It'll be a challenge to improve the squad maybe in the transfer market, to make certain upgrades to the depth as much as the first 11. It will also be more of a strain on this new conditioning and performance department that they've put together to keep these players in a good state as their minutes load goes up. I mean, it's one thing to say to Cole Palmer, you just have all your midweeks off for the first half of the season. Don't worry about it. And, while Bukayo Saka is labouring on a Tuesday and a Wednesday night in Champions League games before his Premier League games on the weekend, that will be a different challenge for him. It will be a different challenge for a lot of these Chelsea players to maintain that level of performance and consistency. But sounds like one of those good problems, doesn't it? These are the kind of problems. These are the kind of problems you want to have if you're a top club. You want to have to manage Premier League and Champions League. The first step is getting there. The second step is actually consolidating and staying there, which is where Newcastle have had problems, where Aston Villa are having problems this year. It's very, very difficult to make that adaptation to, you've got a peak you've got a peak in midweek as well as on the weekends now, with a lot of the same players, because you don't have that margin for error that comes with playing your second string. And the other benefit I think Chelsea have had this year is because those Conference League games, I mean, they've been easy, but they have been at least workouts, so that when Chelsea have had the occasional injury to a starter, they've been able to bring in a Conference League player and they're in rhythm. They're match sharp. They haven't gone 3-4 weeks without a game, which is what you might have next season if they're not trusted to play in Champions League phase. So there are all sorts of changes that would come next season if they're in the Champions League. But I think Chelsea would back themselves to get there and then assess in the summer, what does the squad need to actually bolster us and ready us for competing, genuinely putting our best foot forward on multiple fronts, which at the moment they don't have to do.
In terms of the January transfer window, because I know people keep on talking about strikers, and the only thing I would argue about strikers is the attack's doing really well. Jackson's the main guy. He should be the main guy. He's proven that. I guess my only concern is what happens if he gets injured. And I know Nkunku is probably the most obvious answer here, but that's kind of one area where I'd look to go, is there an Olivier Giroud type on the market to kind of add some rotation? But as you've already expressed, that's not really what the club do under Clearlake compared to the Abramovich era. We're not probably going to go out and sign a 30-year-old. It's just really not going to happen, is it? So that, I think that's unrealistic, because I think last January there was a lot of people talking about, I remember we were talking about Karim Benzema, and that just never materialised, because again, it's not really in the model of the club. Is there anything we should be looking out for in January? Maybe not incoming, because I think that's probably unlikely just based on my judgment looking at things at the moment, but in terms of outgoing potentially, there may be room to trim the squad, I guess.
I don't expect much high profile activity in terms of incomings. I think that Chelsea's league performance has taken a lot of pressure off the sporting directors and the recruitment team. It's taken a lot of the urgency out of the conversation about upgrades, I would say, because Chelsea are clearly at the level they want to be at right now in the Premier League. And I mean, there was a recognition even when they were super busy in January 2023 that January is not the market where you really want to be spending big. They ended up paying a massive premium on some players that they signed that month, and it was notable last year. They seemed to make an institutional decision that we're not going to sign anyone. We're not going to do anything mid-season because we just don't think this is the market to be active in. They are Chelsea. They will always be looking to see what's out there. They will always be looking. And so you can't rule anything completely out, but I think they feel that the squad is in a very good place, that Maresca's doing a very good job with that squad. They haven't had the kind of injury crisis that they had last year, which might change the dynamic in terms of bringing new players in. So the clearest focus will be on outgoings. There are some unresolved situations. Ben Chilwell's the most high-profile one. Something needs to be done there because the situation as it stands works for no one. It doesn't work for Chelsea. It certainly doesn't work for Chilwell, who I feel very sorry for. He's a very good professional. He's had his problems with injuries, but he's a good Premier League player and should be playing Premier League football somewhere or playing at a top level somewhere. You look at someone like Carney Chukwuemeka, who again I think is a very talented player who has just not had in the opportunities that his talent deserves. They couldn't find a solution in the summer. I expect them to revisit that and revisit it seriously in January. And then there are some younger players, Harvey Vale didn't end up getting a move out, Alex Matos. there will be things around the fringes. There are other situations like Raheem Sterling which have been parked until next summer, so I don't expect that to be revisited in any major way. But I think it will be more about finishing the business that was unfinished last summer. Maybe looking at a couple of loans for young players mid-season. I mean, David Washington is one that could go somewhere to try and develop. But beyond that, I don't see Chelsea having a huge motivation to do big incoming transfers in the manner that we've seen at times in the last 2 years, just because they have the main pieces in place. And when you're talking about strikers, I mean, I think Jackson's fine as your starting striker. I think even for where Chelsea want to go, I think Jackson is fine. I'm one of the bigger believers in him as a player. And Nkunku, I think long term is probably not a tenable situation in that he didn't come to Chelsea to sit on the bench and he's not paid like a bench player. But I don't see that one playing out in January really, unless there's just an offer that Chelsea aren't expecting for him. I think it's unlikely that he would leave, and Chelsea certainly wouldn't loan him because he's quality. He's a quality option in an area of the pitch where they need quality options in the business end of the campaign. So yeah, I'm not expecting a busy month. I'm hoping there isn't, because I might be. I don't know whether I'm unusual among journalists. I don't love covering transfers. We've had to do it a lot in the last 2 years, even more than usual with Chelsea. But I much prefer talking about what's actually happening on the pitch, how players are performing, how they're being used, the tactical stuff, how coaches do their jobs. That's all far more interesting to me than who might be coming in.
Yeah, I mean, my big fear about transfers is usually not, oh, Chelsea have to do this, Chelsea have to do that, or what if we sign this player, what if we sold that player. It's more Chelsea getting in the way of themselves. That's kind of always my fear, that I sometimes do think I'd prefer Chelsea do nothing than something usually. Like, that's kind of, it's not that you never make a signing, and obviously some of the recent signings that we've been speaking about that have made the bulk of this team that are exciting at the moment, but absolutely, I think they've done so much work now and brought so many players in, as you said in your piece about the average age. Time, right? Like, give these players time. I think some of the situations absolutely have to be revisited in the summer. I think the goalkeeper situation is one that I do think is kind of untenable. I think at the moment, Sanchez has not been a disaster, but he hasn't been amazing or flawless. And I think that still, for me, is one that eventually they might have to just bite the bullet and sign a big keeper. But they've signed a lot of keepers, so they've maybe put themselves into a hole on that one. But
I think on that, if they're going to sign another keeper, and I made this point in the piece, they have to be very, very confident that it's one of the really consequential goalkeepers of the next generation, that you're signing a Thibaut Courtois, that a goalkeeper that's going to matter on the global stage, a top 5 in their position. Because if you're signing below that, Chelsea have already got a load of those. Georgi Petrovic is a nice keeper. He's just probably not going to be anything more than that ever. Philip Jorgensen seems like a pretty decent keeper. I just don't know if he's ever going to be anything more than that. Wouldn't foreclose on it, but I don't know. Robert Sanchez is now 27, has 5 seasons in the Premier League. That feels like quite a substantial body of work to say that maybe he's not ever going to be that caliber of goalkeeper in terms of consistency, even though he does have some interesting tools that were part of the reason Chelsea signed him. Chelsea do believe Mike Penders could be that level of goalkeeper, but he's played a handful of professional games. He's really early on in his journey, and I think by the time next summer rolls around, he'll still be far too early in his professional journey to be seriously talking about him as a first team prospect for Chelsea. So then the question becomes, if you really believe in Penders, does like someone like Jorgensen become a bridge to that future where it's not the long term solution, but it's a goalkeeper you're fine with until the real guy comes along, or does a guy present themselves in the market? This is the other thing. What elite goalkeepers are out there that are available? They're very, very rare, especially ones that are equipped to play the style of football Maresca wants to play. The demands on goalkeepers have never been greater in terms of what they have to do with their feet and with their brains, as opposed to just their hands. And I think we've been a bit spoiled in the Premier League by just how amazing Alisson and Ederson have been at Liverpool and City. They are unicorns for their position. They are completely unique, really, or just very, extremely rare. And I don't see many other goalkeepers in the world actually that have that skill set to that level. So I think that you'd have to set the bar really high as Chelsea if you're looking to sign a goalkeeper, because it's a crucial position. And the truly elite ones, they're very rare, and when they get to a top club, they don't often move on. So you want to try and get one in place at some point for a long time.
Yeah, I think the problem is the goalkeeper problem at Chelsea has been one that precedes disownership, right? Like, it goes all the way back to the summer of 2018 and the Kepa signing, that not working out. We thought we had it with Mendy, but then it wasn't to be. And my concern is I agree with you that I don't just want, it's a bit like my frustration with squad building at Chelsea when an Axel Disasi gets signed and he doesn't really raise the level, and I think won't be here for that long because I don't think he's a very good defender. So it then becomes a point where what was the point in signing this player if you're not going to sign someone who really is going to raise the level of a key position? It's always my big, people get annoyed at me, but it's one of the big things I always advocate for, giving those squad roles to academy players when you can, if that's possible, because I just prefer doing that. Save that money. You could maybe spend it on an elite tier player. I know it's not as simple as that, and I agree with you that the goalkeeper position is such a key one, but that's kind of my concern, is that I think with the classic, I know Ederson and Alisson are unique keepers, but I think those Liverpool and City stories are very telling, because I think in both cases, pre those goalkeepers being signed, that position was very problematic for their coaches, Klopp and Guardiola respectively, and cost them in big ways. I mean, more so Klopp in a very public way. But that's my big concern about Chelsea at the moment, is if Sanchez remains the first choice and he does what he's done for a majority of his career, which is sure make some good saves, but also have some really costly moments in games, it's a position you eventually, I think, have to address. It's kind of like goalkeeper and striker are the two positions where I really do think you live and die in football in a lot of ways. It's kind of, as much as the game has evolved, it kind of feels like those are still the most vital positions in a lot of ways, and win you and lose you trophies. So I don't know. I maybe I'm being too extreme on Sanchez, and I'm not sitting here and telling you there's this guy we absolutely have to go out and sign. But I'm still not comfortable that Sanchez is first choice. That's just my opinion on it.
Yeah, I think long term the need is there. Unless Sanchez shows something that he hasn't shown yet, long term the need is there. But it is a particular challenge with goalkeeper relative to other positions, I think, in that the top ones really are rare. And when we're talking about the top ones, they've been the top ones for a long time. There haven't been that many new young goalkeepers come along to displace Alisson, Ederson, ter Stegen at Barca, Neuer, Courtois. There really aren't many, especially with these hyper modern skill sets for possession teams. And so I think you have to be always looking, but there probably has to be some degree of patience as well, and not just going for the first keeper that comes along that you think has got a bit of potential, because that's what they did with, it's not quite what they did, but it's kind of what they did with Sanchez. It's kind of what they did with Jorgensen. It's kind of what they did with Petrovic. And the risk of that is not just that that the top tier outcome doesn't transpire. It's also that if they don't reach that level, and in Petrovic's case, if they don't have a particularly hyper-modern skill set, you actually struggle to sell them, because as much as there aren't many great goalkeepers, there are a lot of good ones. And Petrovic is a good goalkeeper, but if you're another club, why would you give Chelsea 20, 25 million for him when you can probably go and get quite a good goalkeeper for much less than that elsewhere on the market? I think that's what Chelsea realised last summer with Petrovic, is that as good as he is, and as well as he performed in 6 months as a Premier League starter, it didn't create the level of market to buy him that Chelsea anticipated. And in the end, you loan him to Strasbourg, which feels like a bit of a waste of a loan spot at Strasbourg that you could be using on a younger player with maybe a higher ceiling. So that you risk stockpiling these guys that aren't elite in search of the elite prospect. So if you really believe Penders is that guy long term and could be that guy in 2-3 years, then maybe you build towards that with a Jorgensen or someone else as kind of a bridge to that future that might be more reliable than Sanchez.
Absolutely, it's definitely one to watch. We'll see how it develops, especially over the course of the next summer, really. I don't think anything's going to happen in January, but we'll see. Thank you so much, Liam, for giving your time today. Great conversation. As ever, as I do all my guests, just a chance for you to shout out where, obviously people know where they can find your work, The Athletic, but in terms of like upcoming pieces as we head towards the end of 2024, what have you been working on from a Chelsea perspective?
This week I've written about Nicholas Jackson's off-ball work, which will be on The Athletic in the next day or so. So look out for that one, about his pressing, about his off-ball runs when Chelsea have the ball, and the bits that people might be less inclined to notice about Jackson, but an aspect of his game which Maresca praised in public quite recently, and I think it's actually a big part of what makes him so valuable to this team. Towards the end of the year, we've got a couple of things that I can't talk about yet, but there are other things that we do every year. So I've been tasked with writing the review of the year, and it's always hard. It's usually harder with Chelsea than with most other clubs. I think the hardest one was 2022, which was just ridiculous with all the Abramovich stuff and the takeover, and 1,000 words please and no more. That was pretty unreasonable ask, but this one should be fairly straightforward.
Yeah, much more calmer year from a Chelsea point of view, which is still mad to say when I think about the summer, but in comparison to like recent years, it is a bit calmer. So maybe just gradually less insane is kind of where we're going with Clear Legs Chelsea, which is good. Thank you again, Liam. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching and listening. Liam's a great guest to have on, and as you know, watching the show, I frequently reference his work and Simon's work as well from The Athletic, so go and check out all of the Chelsea work on The Athletic. Thank you for watching and listening. Follow me across the socials, that's SonOfChelsea, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.